Right, guys. So I want to focus a little bit on return to training or return to play or return to sport, however you come across it, because it's probably the most difficult thing that can be done. You're asking to put your neck on the line, really, in terms of saying that they're return to they're fit to return to play, and you've got yourself a little internal dialogue because, as we'll discuss, being overcautious can be just as, if not more, dangerous than being over aggressive. So it's finding that kind of middle ground. And that's what I want to do. But I want this to be kind of discussion based. Really, if we're on site, we would be discussing. But I want you to kind of think about these topics as we go along, really. And I suppose there is no definitive answer. So I want you to engage with this, or any thoughts that you've got. Please put on the discussion board on Brightspace, because I want this to be kind of ongoing, and I'd really kind of appreciate your kind of thoughts on it, really. So that's the aim. We're going to discuss about our role as physiotherapists, other professions' role, key things that we need to kind of tick off to be able to make a decision on the athlete's return to play. So there's three bits. I'm going to have a kind of set the scene for you, really, for the first bit. We're then going to go about a shared decision-making process and ultimately our role. So to kick us off, really the return to play is a battle between research and practice. And this has been a massive driving force behind me undertaking my PhD, that battle between research and practice, because when someone's doing something in a nice controlled lab, it's very, very different to actually being out there on the field and variables that aren't considered. And in elite sport, you will find that there are many other variables which research doesn't take into account. Performance of a team's massive. Such as particularly when I was in football, such as a price of success, that when you're talking about job insecurity for people, and that you have that one of their star players on the treatment table, yeah, there's a bit of pressure, let's say, and that happens. For a kickoff, you can't be naive enough to think, well, I'm sure the manager will understand. No, he won't. Not when his job's on the line. Not when his job's on the line. So that in itself can be difficult. Also, the players want to play. That's what they do. So you'll get pressure from those about, when can I go back? What have I got to do? And ultimately, this is part of the things that we will discuss during this session, and ultimately in the practicals as well. And ultimately, use the research as a guide. You know the player, you know your patient, you will know the healing process of that particular structure, and apply your rehabilitation accordingly. That's the best bit of advice I can give you. Okay, there is no standard timeout from an MCL sprain. It's difficult, when you're asked it straight away. How long is it going to be out for? If you give a time, they will hang on to it. If you say 6 weeks and they're back in 8, you'll be deemed a failure, which is wholly unfair. And I used to break it down. I used to say, well, it depends on how this settles over the next 72 hours. We could reassess it after that. And then it depends how he responds well to the exercises that we give him and stuff. So you're kind of putting the onus back on the player, and taking a light off you. And is it a political way of answering the question? Damn right it is. But such is the pressure, and you're going to get that now within MSK outpatients. When can I go back? And you've got to be not avoiding the question, but breaking it down into little sections. So as I said, there's two ways you could do it. You could be overcautious and think, I am definitely not sending this person back too early. Or you could be quite aggressive, thinking, Christ, there's a lot of pressure on it. I need to get him back as quick as I can because it'll make me look good. There's problems with both. There's a bit of evidence now to suggest that the most dangerous time is within 50 days of returning to play, regardless whether that's an aggressive approach or over a cautious approach. Because don't forget, as I said in the previous one, in terms of I think of the proprioception bit, where I said that you can keep someone out for years, you can never, ever, ever replicate the stresses and stimuli of training and actual partaking. So you can keep someone out for years. They're still not fit because they haven't gone back into training. So the first 50 days are key, particularly for soft tissue injuries. Athletes will have strength deficits, and reduced sprint performance. We've talked about in session 2, even after being cleared to return to play, and that's because, as I say, partly because rehabilitation is not thorough enough historically, but second of all, because you cannot replicate the stresses of training, they're never going to be 100%. They're not. You can get them as close as you possibly can and get them close to return to training. And that's where you've got to be very, very different. So, when someone returns to training, I used to say they used to have 10 sessions of full training, for the medium to long-term ones, without any exacerbation of symptoms or without any reaction the day after. After that, then we can start to think. And even that, that's quite a firm standpoint, but 10 training sessions might only take you 2 weeks. So I've still got another 36 days to go before I can hit that 50-day mark. A part of that is as well, in the calendar. So sometimes I would be a bit sneaky and send someone back to training when there's lots of games, knowing that they would have time to recover. The scar tissue will be immature by definition, because of it's new tissue, so that it will be immature, which has not been replicated to the stresses and strains of training. And return to play should only occur when the risk of re-injury is the same for primary injury. Okay, so that's kind of why people think I'll be overcautious, because you're never going to get them 100% before they go to train. You've got lots of mature scar tissue, and the evidence says that by definition of rehabilitation, they should only go and play again once the risk of re-injury is the same as primary injury. So that's the theory for the overcautious. The opposite end of the spectrum, why should we be aggressive? Well, each case should be based on an individual basis. I get that. A lot of it's dependent on the availability or ability of the next best player. The pressures that you will get from the management, as I say, it's a good player, are considerable. And elite sport is many things, but things like employment law really don't come into account. So if the manager wants to get rid of you because you're not getting his players back quick enough, you can be sacked, and there's not a right lot you can do about it. That's a harsh reality of it. So you do need to take that into account. The stage of the career. Let me give you an example. So it's someone who's about to retire, and your team has got a cup final. Are you going to keep him out for the cup final if he's touch and go? Probably not. Probably not. Probably not. So it does have an impact. And I think this is one of the differences between research and real life, because research, everything's hunky-dory, everything's controlled, everything's nice, and everything fits into a box, whereas in reality you've got so many different variables and external factors that's going to influence your decision. And this is a big point of mine, is that, well, if you kept every player out until the risk of re-injury is the same as a primary injury, you wouldn't last long, because no one would ever play. Okay, so it's making that informed judgment as best you can. And I would argue that the more that you keep players out in the overcautious approach, you could actually increase injury risk, because every day that they're not training, they're not meeting the demands of what training is. Does that make sense? So You could keep them in the gym. You could keep them and doing all your control drills till the cows come home. You still can't replicate training. And the longer that you delay that, you could actually increase the injury risk. So the answer is, it's a bit of both. It's a very grey area. It's a bit of both. I am certainly more aggressive than I am over cautious. But there are certain things that I will do to help me with that. Because as I say, at best, it's an informed, educated guess as to when the best part is. Okay, but we will discuss that a little bit more. Part of it is this, the decision-making process. I remember asking, I popped this question to when I used to teach on a master's degree in sport rehabilitation at my previous institution. And I said, who has a decision? Who decides whether a player goes back? A lot of people said the physio. Vast majority said the physio. Some said the coach. Nobody said the player. And I found that quite interesting. Because for me, I could get someone to do all the tests in the world. I could test them on force plates. I could test them on IKD. I could put them in training for months. They're not ready. They don't play. It's as simple as that. They don't have the final say because there are certain things whereby the decision kind of moves. I mean, if we look at this figure here that was put forward by Dijkstra a few years ago, and you can see lasers coming out, guys, so you know that I'm going to have to minimize in a minute. But you can see, this is an ideal situation where we've got athlete, coach, and healthcare professional, which is us. And the decision lies in the middle. Now, there are certain times when the athlete shouldn't get a say. And the best example is return from head injuries. Return from head injuries, of course, is a very contemporary issue. The athlete should not get a say. It should be here. The coach shouldn't get a say, really. That's all in the healthcare professional because there are graded returns to training, strict protocols, which I will show you, which they should follow. But in the vast majority of other injuries, we should have a shared decision-making process. And I'm fully behind this. If we look at the different contributions we can get from the different parties, the athlete will give you subjective, i.e., how are they feeling about it? If they don't feel ready, they do not go back to train. As simple as that. So they will get, and that information, that subjective information, is as important as all the tests that you do. Probably more important. Okay. What does a coach give you? Contextual data. What do I mean by that? Training regime that's coming up. Is it a particularly hard week of training they've got? Because if not, you might go, well, let's leave him out for that week and then reintroduce him when it's a little bit lighter. Yeah. Have they got lots of games coming up? Yeah. Things like that. That's important. That's going to make a decision. If I've had someone that's been out for 9 months and the week coming up, they're doing heavy contact sessions, no, I'm not going to put my player back into that. Regardless of how he feels, regardless of the tests that I've done, the coach will get the say. Does that make sense? And then obviously what we have in terms of a healthcare professional is objective data. How far can he jump? How quick can he run? How is his fatigue protocol? How is his fatigue resistance performing? Yeah, that's our job. So it's a shared decision-making process, and something that I'm right behind for the vast majority of injuries, other than head injuries, which we'll come on to in another presentation. Okay, the old minimizing and maximizing. Here we go. So there's 3 key steps as well, isn't there? In terms of returning to play, and this is with us, as a healthcare professional, and our role within the club. I mean, this is, you know, basing this in elite sport. We make the athlete and the coach aware of the options that exist. So, for example, you know, when I had players coming back from ligamentous injuries, lower limb or particular, I would say, you know, what I would like to do is for this player to do 10 non-contact training sessions. So which drills can they be part of and which drills can they not be? Okay, and we could work our way around that. The option would be, so the second step is then providing more options, saying, well, okay, he's non-contact, so, you know, he can do A, B, C, and D. You know, for example, for my my goalkeeper, the lad that you've seen a lot of, the ACL deficient one, we would build like a semicircle of cones around him, so no one could go within sort of 5 yards of him, but he's still reacting to stimulus, he's still reacting to things that's going on the pitch. Okay, and then obviously the decision, you know, as to whether they want him back in, and the decision might be, well, okay, I've heard your choices and the options for each, and I don't think this is the week for him to come back. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. You know, it's a shared decision-making process, and it should be. And this is, I'll show you an example now. And again, you can access this through your non-narrated stuff. And this is something that I did with the goalkeeper in terms of, hang on a minute. You won't be able to see that, just a second. So again, we're going to have to do this palaver, I'm afraid. Let me see if I can see it. Here we go. Okay, so hopefully you can see that now. So this was an example of when I use kind of shared decision making, or certainly, you know, my part for the goalkeeper that you saw that was ACL deficient, and sort of this is what he has to do to be able to return to training. So I was a little bit prescriptive with it, but the player was fine with that. You will see that there are some errors on here already, bearing in mind what we have talked about, and feel free to critique it, because I certainly did. This was probably, oh goodness me, this was January 2010, I think it was, and I finished my masters in 2011, so you can see what happened here. But essentially, max knee dip. This was something where single leg, the other leg in front of them, and they would dip as far as they could. And that's looking at a lot of eccentric quads control, and we would basically measure from the greater trochanter to, we got them on a box, to the box. Right equals left, so that good knee, sorry, the injured knee had to be the same as the other one. A triple hop test, so how far he would go on 3 hops, and we would do that again and again and again. We would do that most days in terms of rehabilitation. So we didn't measure it once; we did it 3 times. We did it 3 times, and we did it then, you know, lots and lots of times to see if he could maintain that distance, you know, after strength and conditioning stuff in the gym, and after, you know, when he would kind of do grass work with me. Vertical jump, again, we used a counter movement jump, so we would look to see if the metrics he could maintain and how fatigue affected that. Then I did the Illinois agility run. Oh goodness me, we'll skip over that, and the sprints as well. The reason that I did that, and I'm not trying to dig myself out of a hole, is purely because that was the metrics that were used at pre-season. So I felt that at that time I had to have a baseline measure rather than trying to create my own, just for the benefit of the player to see, well, this is what you were pre-season and this is what we are now. I did other agility stuff on the back of that, but I didn't put it as a goal because it wouldn't mean anything to the player or the coach, so it was kind of pointless. Badminton sessions, brilliant sport. You can recreate a lot of the positions that the knee goes into in badminton than you can in football or rugby, and obviously it's non-contact. but you're putting that knee into that vulnerable position. And the beauty of working with elite athletes is they are competitive. So they're never going to think about that. They're just concentrating on beating you. So you can get them to give everything, particularly if you can play a bit, which I can. So that helped. And then the collision sessions. So in terms of, if we come back to the proprioception and that pre-muscle activation and recognizing that he's going to get hit, but also for him in particular, he was injured from a collision. So he came down, landed, caught the ball, landed on his single leg, and he got whacked on the outside of it. So for him psychologically, that was a big thing as well. And that third collision session was working on that mechanism of injury. And then sessions with a bloke called Craig Mawson, which will mean nothing to you, who was basically the goalkeeper coach at the club. And we did 10 progressive sessions. So I worked with him. He was the coach, so it's a shared decision making. It wasn't the manager necessarily, it was the actual coach. So I worked with him, and he had 10 progressive sessions with him. And then he could go back to full training. So that's an example that, the player himself, he came up with that one. He came up with that one, and he came up with that one. So it was a shared decision. So I let him have some say about the goals that he wanted to do, and I did the rest as well. So let me just get back onto the screen, and it'll take me a second or two. I will get better at this. There we go. Okay, it's not going onto the slideshow for some reason. We'll just work our way through this. This is a model that's been come up with as well, which is called the START framework, and it's by a guy called Schreier, whose reference I think I've put at the end of it. It's a little bit prescriptive, but it there are some good things that you can take from it. It's basically put into 3 steps. So health risk, activity risk, and risk tolerance, or tolerance of risk, and it's broken up quite nicely, really. In terms of tissue health, so you're looking at essentially optimizing the environment for that tissue to heal, and then into step 2, you're then doing controlled stresses to that tissue to help strengthen it, and then step 3 is about looking at the external factors that could contribute to your return to play decision, which that's the bit that I quite like. So it's taken into account that there are external variables. So if you can see from that model there in the bottom, we're talking about timing and season and pressure from athletes and things like that, and financial implications which do happen, and that's why I quite like this. As I say, it's a little bit over prescriptive for me, if I'm completely honest, but I do quite like what it's trying to achieve, really. Again, guys, sorry, I'm going to stop sharing my window, and I'm going to try and do it again. Okay, so this is hopefully you can see that now. So this is what's called the rehabilitation considerations of that particular model. So I've tried to simplify it really into the stage, in terms of the context of the injury and the considerations we have to make as physiotherapists. And you can see that obviously there's a progressive thing. So in terms of activity risk or step 2, what we're looking at is applied and progressive load to try and strengthen that tissue. Okay, so we're applying our exercise in line with the healing process of soft tissue there. We're considering things like risk factors for the injury, so things like proprioception, or if we're looking at anterior dislocated shoulder, we're starting to look at scapular stability and scapular setting, things like that. And then obviously the risk tolerance, it's more assessment of the function that's required. So coming back to that needs analysis, which it always does. And for me, as physiotherapists, what do we need to consider? Your threshold to be met. And I know that we said at the start that at best it's an educated guess, but you have to have a threshold at some point, and that's what you need to consider. And also the psychological risk. You know, this is and that's where the shared decision making process comes comes into play as well. So I've got an example here, and it is the tackle bags, and I suspect this will open separately. So we're going to have to do a good old screen share. Oh my goodness me. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. So a little bit of background about this lad. He's coming back from an anterior dislocated shoulder, and we're looking at, as you can see, collision. So late stage. It was again another non-operative one. So we didn't operate on it. He was able to be put back under anaesthetic, and then we worked on stability of the shoulder. So it's the right shoulder that he injured. Okay. And now we're working on many things. We're working on collision. We're working on CV fitness. We're working on sport-specific movements because it will involve collision. Of course, football is a contact sport. I know some of you rugby lot will disagree, but it is a contact sport. Okay, so we have to take that into account. The colour of my kit is horrendous, isn't it? Horrible, horrible kit. And this was one of his last sessions. And what I'm going to do as he goes on, so he's halfway through, you can see that he's really getting tired now. He can't even collide. He's having to lift it rather than running into it. And that's nothing to do with sort of his awareness of where his shoulder's at. He is absolutely blowing. So this would last for 3 minutes, and 3 minutes off, just because that replicates the demands of football. It's a one-to-one sort of ratio, and also he'd do 3 lots of this, so he'd be doing 27 minutes worth of this, because I'd have similar things. They're loving it. The support for the other players. He's still got to keep going, and I'm taking into account that fatigue. I'm taking into account the fact that he's got to run into me. He's got to run into those tackle bags when he's tired. Okay, I have to get that in. It's no good him being able to do that, just for the first couple of times. He's going to be able to do it time and time again. And I'm actually going to run this again because I let him do a kick. Now, I've paused it there. Look at that right shoulder and look what I've replicated. And I've replicated that after 27 minutes of work. He fell onto his shoulder. That's how it came out. And it was fine. And I showed this back to the player. And said, Tommy, that is your mechanism of injury. Psychologically, what he got from that was incredible, and he went on, and he never came out again, as far as I know. He went on to play sort of semi-pro level, and very often that can be involved in the decision making. So the purpose of that video and the purpose of that session was to help him with his subjective data that he's going to give me, because he felt ready to go back once he'd seen that. And if you think of the number of times that I got him to do that, so his shoulder came out on the first time of doing that. We replicated that over the course of that week 60 odd times, and it stayed in. And so that's where you've got to be, dare I say it, sneaky, but probably creative, and have a purpose as to why you're doing that particular exercise. For them, they saw tackle bags and they thought, great, I've got an opportunity to run into Scully and try and knock him off his feet. They never did. I was solid as a rock. But for them, it was like, right, let's have a go. They weren't thinking deep down, oh, I see what he's doing. A little sneaky little physio. You know, he's going to try and get me to replicate my mechanism of injury. They don't think like that, particularly footballers. Okay. But again, it was to help with that shared decision making. I was confident he was fine. After seeing that, he was. Okay. All right, let's do the old switch around with the screen sharing. Ah, there we go. This was an interesting one from the Schreier paper, and it involves decision-making process, and it was taken from the dullest sport in the world, probably other than Formula One, American football. Apologies to anyone who plays it. It honestly could send a glass eye to sleep, that sport. But the point of this is that it involved particular injury. So they came up with a hypothetical injury, and they interviewed players. They interviewed physical therapists, or the equivalent over in the States is what they're called. So what they did, if we have a look here at the graph. So going up the left-hand side, okay, you've got 0 to 100%. That was how many of those particular medical professionals recommended activity by training. On the bottom here, you've got essentially increase in severity of signs and symptoms. So each of these, they would gradually go. They were hypothetical, of course. There was two positions. There's something called a goal kicker, field goal kicker, and something called a football linebacker. Now, for what I can understand from my brief knowledge of American football is the linebacker runs into people and the goal kicker doesn't. It obviously kicks the ball when they get a penalty or whatever it is. So let's have a look. So even if they had some symptoms of AC sprain, nearly 100% were recommended exercise or activity because of the risk of developing pain because of their position. And only when it really kind of got into severe pain were we below 50%. Even when they were still saying they can play. Think of that. Think of that for return to training. The interesting bit is what happens to the linebackers, so the people that run into people. Mild signs and symptoms, what's that, about 70%? A little increase then drops right down to less than 20 and then works its way down. Now, look what happens when the same group of people were asked, would their decision changed if that player played his final game and they would get a bonus in terms of number of appearances made. Look what happens. We have an increase to about 80%, but then typically where we would drop to less than 20, nearly half would let them play with the same symptoms. Even when you're getting to severe pain, all right, there's not a big difference, but the point is if there was a financial reward for the player, they would overturn their decision. Think of that. And that's what we talk about in terms of the external variables, the external factors. Okay. It's just something to kind of, not that I'm saying overturn it if the player has the option of getting a finance reward, but I'm saying it is kind of indicative of the pressures that you're under as a physio working in elite sport. So that leads us quite beautifully, doesn't it, onto the role of a physio. Well, what's your role? Three big ones: realistic and accurate evaluation of the player's ability to compete with the lowest accepted re-injury risk. The important thing there, guys, is the lowest accepted re-injury risk. You can't send people back with no injury risk. It's not possible because you cannot replicate the demands of training. And that's one of the big kind of disagreements that I have with the overcautious approach. If you're waiting for them to be 100%, they're going to be out for a long time. So it's up to you to make that judgment, and that gets better with experience. And you know what? Goodness me, I got it wrong. You know, and you saw that with some of the reflective stuff I did in the other module about when I got it wrong with an ankle injury. But it's realistic as well. You know, your threshold has to be realistic. Ensure that your opinions are based on objective data and the knowledge of the athlete. The important thing there is that you're not just basing it on the test that you do. Yes, they have a large say, but your athlete has to have a say as well. It's not you that gets the final say. It's a shared decision-making process, okay? And going back to point one, that lowest accepted re-injury risk might be in consultation with the coach about what training involves that particular week or that particular session or that particular section of the season, so to speak. And respect to the people's decisions. You know, you are not in some elevated position because you're a physio, and therefore pathologically and from a rehabilitation point, yes, you would know more than other people, but their decisions are just as valid. And we've talked about it, haven't we, in that shared decision making process Venn diagram. The information you get from a coach has a massive impact on whether you decide that athlete is ready to return to train, because it depends what they've got coming up, you know, and the player has just as valid opinion as you do. So it's a shared decision making process which we have to have as physiotherapists. And again, just some resources for your own reading, really. I particularly like the Dijkstra paper, the 2013, which talked about that kind of Venn diagram. I think that was quite an interesting read as well. And the McCall paper as well, the McCall et al. That was it asks more questions than it answers, but I think it really sets the scene quite nicely. As ever, the hyperlinks are there, guys, so just click onto them and it will take you to the page to be able to download. There we go. Right, you're probably dizzy with all the screen sharing, but that concludes obviously the return to play, and again, hopefully it's given you an overview and put the context of rehabilitation into the decision-making process that you've had, and other things that you have to take into account. And I would recommend that if you guys get to go onto placement, or get to shadow somebody who works within an elite setting, ask them about that kind of stuff. You know, what is the threshold that you would want them to meet for a particular injury? You know, to get their opinion on it and see how they're approaching it. But as ever, guys, any other questions, please feel free to post to the discussion board, and I'll be able to answer them for you.